So you have a lot of possibilities to work inside Lightroom, but there are definitely also really a lot of ways where Photoshop is the better choice to work and to retouch your images. And right now I want to show you how you have to set up your Lightroom to Photoshop settings so that everything works just smoothly. So let's get started. So I'm right now inside Lightroom, and I want to set up how Lightroom throws the images over to Photoshop. And for this you go to the Preferences. This is here on the Mac in the Lightroom menu. At Windows, as far as I know, it's in the Edit menu, but just go to Preferences. And here you have the external editing. And the standard settings are like this, or roughly like this, maybe so. So standard is, or the default settings are that Lightroom will generate a TIFF file with the color space of ProPhoto RGB, 16 bits per component or per channel, a resolution of 240, which is totally bullshit that it's here. You just can insert anything, and as mentioned before, the only thing that counts are the pixels, and the compression for the zip format. What I would recommend is the following. ProPhoto RGB is the biggest color space, and it's in technical color space. So there's no hardware that supports ProPhoto RGB. If you're working on a screen that has a big gamut, for example my ISO screen, I can work with Adobe RGB, because then I see all the colors on the screen which I have handed over from Lightroom to Photoshop. Just go with 16 bits per component, that's a good default setting, and then you're good to go. In my case, I don't use TIFF, but if you're using TIFF, use the zip compression. In my case, as mentioned before, I'm using PSD. So that's exactly my settings. PSD, Adobe RGB, 16 bits per component, and whatever you want to have here. Maybe take 240, that's the default. Okay, and now you're ready to go. And when I now right click and say edit in Photoshop, you see that's a raw file right now, edit in Photoshop, then this file gets handed over to Photoshop. And here you see it, that's my raw file, but that's not really true. Why? We will see it in a second. But I don't have an option with a profile mismatch, which will be the case in your case, I think. So what I have set it up here in Photoshop is in the Edit menu, and then go down to the color settings. And here inside the color settings, you can say what's your working space. In my case, it's sRGB, but you can also say what to do with profile mismatches. And I set it up my Photoshop with the RGB to preserve embedded profiles. Because when I come over from Lightroom, I want to have Adobe RGB as my files as before, or set it up before. But I do a lot of sRGB work for the web and for thumbnails and so on. So I have my working space with sRGB. But because I have set the preserve embedded profiles, and don't ask when opening, and I have a profile mismatch, then Photoshop will preserve the embedded profile. And so you see which profile you had on your image. Just press on this small arrow over here and change from document size to document profile, and now you see which is the profile you have opened, or which profile is on your opened image. And the next thing to see on top, as mentioned before, this is a raw file, but here in Photoshop we can't work on raw files when we do the pixel editing. So if I just save the image, Command S, then you see this image gets saved as the PSD, as mentioned before, and now everything is fine. And this PSD gets handed back over to Lightroom and is inside Lightroom, and so I switch back to Lightroom, and here you see that's over there the raw file, and next to this raw file here, that's my PSD file.